you go. Let's see, we are live. Perfect. All right. So what I want to talk about on this video is my insight in data. How do you handle this? How do you store your data? How complex is your data? All those kind of stuff. And also, how do you interact with your with the API? Uh, how do you use? What technique do you use? What tool do you use actually? So that's pretty much what I'm going to go over this. I'm going to share some ideas, and we're going to talk best practice when it comes to handling data in general and on a client. I'm going to show you some stuff. I'm going to show you some implementation that you can change. I'm going to share some tools as well. So let's get started. So you have a web application and you have an API. Don't care what powers that API, how it got written. You need to communicate your web application with the data coming from with the server API that you have in hand. So for this one, I set up a blank project. See, there's nothing under the source folder here, but I set up a server. What this does, I'm gonna go into distraction free mode. So you can see this is a simple express server API, and it's on server on 4500 port. We have cores enabled, so allow us to communicate between two different ports. Or so my app going to be served on local 3000, as you can see here, and my server is going to be served on my API. Going to be on 4500. All this is doing is setting up a simple to-dos API. If you want, I can insert this, but this is just a dummy API, dummy to-dos API, and we can see handles delete, the post. You can post in here. You can get a single item by ID, and you can get all the items as well. And all this is doing is setting. I'm using an items map here. That's pretty much to mimic the database. So it's pretty dumb, pretty simple. I normally use this to when I want to experiment something in the front end. But also there's API mocks that you can use, which are pretty good. If you have any other way, for sure. But this is API. We're not going to do anything here. I'm going to share this code afterwards. So now I have my application. So far it's just the index.html. And here we're going to building our to-do API. So I'm going to do something like to-dos app. To-dos app is the best and simple app that you can build that allows you to explore most of the ideas that you want to interact or play with. So the first thing you need is a way to communicate with this. So you may be using fetch, you may be using Axios, or doesn't matter. Right? It doesn't matter. Maybe if you Angular, you use something different. Whatever you use to make the request, it's up to you. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna do the first thing, which is create API service. Yes, it's all TypeScript here. So I'm gonna create a directory actually when I'm gonna put all the services here, and I'm gonna move my API service there. So what is the purpose of AI service? So the purpose of AI service is to provide a single point where I do all the API communication thing. So let's say today I want to use fetch. And then later on, I describe that Axios is a better thing. I want to use Axios then. So what this API service is a single I'll call it a facade where I'm gonna create a simple interface, and from that interface, I can handle anything inside, and the rest of the application doesn't have to worry about it. So let's say in a month from now, I change the tool, or how I'm gonna do it. I can just come here, change that tooling, and the rest of the application continues to work as it should. And this is important because we are concerning about the scalability of the application very early on. So we want to make sure the application scales, and whatever the modification we do in the future continues to work regardless of what decision we make. So this API service is pretty much as a base, a facade. And for here, I create a first private property called base. And what I want here is to take a base URL. So this just takes whatever where this you pretty much telling it where do you want where the API that you're gonna consume will be coming from. So for here, we know that is gonna be served on localhost 4500. So here, if you pass a base, that is gonna use that base. Otherwise, it's just gonna gonna use the default because this is what we use by default. So your app can be anything. So here, I'm setting a base. So when I create this thing, that's what it is. So what I'm gonna do here is also provide simple interface for getting something, for posting something, and not gonna do much. I'm gonna do delete. I'm just gonna do these three. The simple correct. Get, post, and delete. Get, you get stuff. Uh, and what these do, what they take is an endpoint. So you have your API endpoint, and it takes that's a string, and then what it does is return a fetch. And what we're gonna do, I'm gonna compose this. I'm gonna use our base here, and then I'm gonna concat the endpoint. So here is just composing the full URL for you. And then I'm going to add a simple then here. Um, and here I'm just going to handle, because fetch is complicated. So here I'm going to just return a result, which is what's going to come back out of fetch. And I'm going to do JSON here. So this is just something simple. Otherwise, I'm going to just return the result so you can handle it. So you can actually, this can get way more complex. So I'm gonna keep it simple. So here I'm gonna try to get the JSON out of this response. Um, so the response can be returned on everything. Can be I don't know, text. It can be a JSON. It can be anything you want. Anything the API returns. So I'm just trying to be generic and cautious here and gonna catch just in case the response is not JSON, it's going to throw an error. So I'm just going to catch and just going to return and say, hey, you go handle it, since you already know what the response would look like. And I'm going to actually do something similar. So this, we're just creating a facade around the fetch. I use class here, but you can use function. You can use whatever you want. So here I'm going to do, so same thing for the post. Here's going to take a string. And for the post, we normally post the data. So just going to be an object literal. And I'm going to take some options as well. And options is going to be a type. It's going to be key is going to be string. And we could elaborate here, but I'm just going to make sure it's any, just so we not waste time with types here. I'm just going to explore quick. So for post, the request is a little different. So I'm going to add an object here. And here I'm going to spread the options. And I'm going to make sure the method is always post. And headers is assumed to be content type. I believe content type, that's how you spell it. And it's going to be application JSON. That's how it's going to be. And we can spread the options here as well, allowing to override headers. Since this will not know this is headers, I'm going to do this. And definitely we're going to have the body. we have to stringify this data. And how we handle, we're gonna handle it the same way. So you see, I'm not doing too much in this API service. I'm just doing the very basics. So for the delete, same thing here. The endpoint is string. I'm actually gonna take this whole thing. I'm gonna paste it here for delete. Oops, actually here. And the delete doesn't take data. It's gonna be endpoint and options. So all I'm gonna do is, I'm actually not even gonna return. I'm gonna handle it then here. Um, all I'm gonna do is spread options and then make sure the method is delete. Perfect. And that's a simple API service. So let's go back here. Now from the API service, what I can do, I can create something specific for this API service. So I'm gonna do to-do service, for example. So what this actually is a service that's going to handle a specific endpoint of our API. So you can have many endpoints. You can have the user's endpoint. You can have the to-dos endpoint. You can have whatever endpoint you want for the API, like whatever it is. So you create a service around to handle that specific endpoint, because the endpoint can be quite complex. It can support many request types and it can get crazy. So from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to import my API service. Perfect. And then from here, we could do two ways. We can do, I'm going to do this. We're going to extend this. So we just use the top, or we can just create an API. This is up to you. Again, the implementation here doesn't matter. So here I'm creating a new API server. Make sure it's private so nothing can access it, nothing can change it. Uh, I'm using class. You can use the functions, whatever you want, whatever you like. It's up to you. So here I'm creating a to-do service. So the to-do server is going to handle very specific things. So here I'm allowed to create specific handlers. So I'm going to create the to-do get to-dos, which is going to return an API call to get. And here I'm going to provide my endpoint. I'm going to say the endpoint is to-dos. Actually, if I go to API service, here I think it's best to also include API here, because if I go to a server here, we're going to see that everything is served under /API and then we have the endpoint specific for add to-dos. So I'm going to add that. So the API server by default will be localhost 4500. It points to API. Now let's go back to the to-do service here. So I create that. And I'm going to say the endpoint here is to-dos. And then I'm going to handle this here. So this is nice, because on this service, what I can do, I can make sure that the data that comes back is already formatted in a way that is ready to use by my application. So it's common to see, like, for example, if you go visit React apps or Vue or Angular, even, you can see that you get the data and then you try to format it, or in Angular you pipe it in, then you format it, something like that. So I find those to be very unscalable. That's the best I can describe it. So the app should not worry too much about that. Your components should not worry about formatting or fetching or dealing with the data in any type, and storing or anything. You should just receive the data, handle it, and that's it. So here, what this to-do service allows me to do is it handles the request, and then the response comes back, and then I can do here, I can format it in a way that I want. So here I'm just taking whatever is in there. The server that I set up doesn't care about the data type. So whatever I post, it will take and save it. Um, But in the real world, probably the data will come in a specific format, and you probably want to reformat it to match your application. So you reformat. So this is a nice place where you do that. So you don't have to do that. So by the time you consume this data, it's already ready for you. You don't have to format it inside your application, inside the view. So from there, I can use this and get to do. So a single one. Get to do, the to do, we're going to take an ID, we're going to use a string. And here, I'm going to compose this. And also, you don't have to put this logic in the UI. So make sure you separate. So what I'm showing here is how you can separate all your backend communication storage and data handling away from the view. So you can have a strict way to handle everything. So here, same way, I'm not going to do anything. So I'm going to do a create to do. And create to do will take data. I'm going to say data is object literal. It's contain anything. I'm not typing anything. And here, I'm going to use this. I'm just going to handle this here. So instead of here, instead of get, I'm going to do a post. So we're going to post here. I'm going to pass the data. So with these APIs, will serve as a, so anytime I want to create a specific service to handle any point, I use the API. I know that every request is being handled the same way. So if anything is wrong, I know I have a single place where I need to fix this. So same thing here for the delete. I'm gonna delete to do here. Delete to do, and it's take an ID, and I'm just gonna handle it raw. Delete to do, create to do, get to do, get to do's. So I also want this to be a singleton. This is probably why you want to make this a function. So I'm gonna make sure it's to do service. I'm gonna create a new to do service. So I'm always returning a singleton. So you make sure it doesn't matter how you import the service, you always get the same thing. Because there's not, if I had to, if this service take a specific uh, thing in the constructor, I'll probably not care, but this I'll make sure it's always the same thing. So everything that uses it, import this, I always have the same reference. So that's the singleton. All right, so we already handled how we're gonna interact with API. We're gonna fetch everything. Uh, but how we handle storage? So we fetch this. Uh, how to handle storage? So if you come from React, you probably use Redux. If you come from Angular and GRX store, I think Vue use Vuex store, something like that. It doesn't matter your background. So whatever the tool you use is fine. Uh, well, maybe it's fine. But the important here, so what I want to do is create a pipe. So we have the service that handles all the communication with the service, and they get the data, and that's it. They don't care what happens to the data after. So they handle the communication itself. So next step is to have a store. So the store will probably be the middleman in this application where the store will communicate with the services and use the services so we can make requests and everything on your behalf. And the application interacts directly with the store without having to worry about where the data come from, regardless what needs to happen. So the UI only cares about the data, the store only cares about storing, and the services only care about fetching the data and everything. So for this, I'm going to install some tool called, I'm going to show you here, client store, client web storage. I don't know why it's not coming up, so I'm just going to npm install here, web storage. If I go to npm, client web storage there. So it handles IndexedDB, WebSQL, local storage, and even in-memory data. So it already handles all the type of storage, and it provides a very simple API to do so. I'm going to show you right away. And um, and it also can be used with anything. You can use it with any framework you use for your UI. So it's up to you really. So I'm going to come back here. So that's already installed, and I'm going to close this. I'm going to create a new directory called stores. By the way, this technique can use with web components, so I'm going to use web components for this. So here I'm going to do to-do store.ts. So let's make our store. I'll go distraction free here. So the first thing I'm going to do is import client storage. And the first thing I need is the schema. So this allows me to create schema and define the data format. So a lot of times when you work in UI, what happens is you one, you need to validate the type of data, and you have to compose the data to make sure you send the API the right format and everything. And if API change, yeah, you have to go back and change again. Or if you change the version of API you need to use. So that changes all the time. So this schema allows me to define how my data looks like. So the first thing, actually, since I'm using a TypeScript, I'm going to export an interface of how my to-do is supposed to look like. I'm going to create a to-do interface here. And it's supposed to have a name. So we're going to have a name string. For some reason, my thing is not analyzing. Okay, my Eddie is acting a little bit. So here I'm going to create a description. What's going to be a string? I'm also going to put a boolean completed to make sure I track if my to-do is done or not. Perfect. So that's how my data, that's how I want my data look like for the interface. So this is not how I want my data to look for the server. This I'm defining how my application expect the to-do item to come back. So what means if the server does not return the data in that format, I'll come back here and make sure when I get the data from the server, I format it in the way that I want to match that interface, and only then I get to return it. So you have a specific place to do that. So we're not doing that in the UI. So with schema, I can create my to-do schema. So here I'm going to make sure I'm defining my data real well. So here I'm going to say, create a new schema. I'm going to say you are a to-do. I don't know why this thing is not giving me the autocomplete. Yeah, it's happening. It's good. So I'm going to delete this. Just create it again. To do store.ts. Save. Okay. See my ID freaked out a little bit. Okay. So here I'm creating my schema. The schema is how I'm defining the data to look like. I'm gonna give you a name because it's back there. So I'm gonna say this is it to do, and I can give it the object, so which how it looks like. And here it may seem redundant, but it's going to do a schema value. But this is how you tell the store what your data look like. And then we're gonna say true for required. So we require this name to do. So this little library also do validation, which is also something you often have to do when you work with API. You get a response, you get a data, you need to validate it, or you need to send something to the API. You make sure you validate, especially if the information comes from the user. So you need to do validation on that data before you're able to store it or you send it to backend. So what this little tool does is actually validate my data for me. So he's handled the formatting for me and make sure that always the data always have all the properties that it needs and it's the right type and it's not missing when it needs to be there. It's just doing a lot of work for me. And then I can just worry about doing normal stuff and not worry about all these details in the UI. So here I'm going to create a description as well. And so I'm pretty much matching it to the description, matching it to the interface here. It's going to be a string. It's not going to be required. I'm not required that, but I want to do have a default value. So by default, if you don't provide a description, I'm just going to say no description. And also I'm going to do completed. I'm going to new schema value. It's going to be a boolean. Good. I have my schema now. See, here's complaining about my to do. So, and it's complaining because the schema, what the store also do is already, so the store also handles generating IDs. So if you're doing um, serverless application and you want the UI to handle everything, this is your way. Or so um, he has things like, let's look at the default value. So he has the ID. So he handles creating an ID for my item. It also tracks when the item was created and the last updated time. So if I update an item in a store, it will just increment or update last updated time automatically for me, which is cool. This is like working with a database pretty much. So I have my schema for my store. By the way, if I didn't want that to include the ID, I can just say false. When it creates my thing, it will not create my ID. It will not include ID, I created it or updated it if I don't want to. Now I'm gonna come back here. I'm gonna do something so we can actually see this thing in action. So I'm gonna do a quick script. I'm gonna do source. Source gonna be store. I'm gonna import the to-do store for now. So just we have it there. Oh, I had to do. I believe. Oh, it's not. I'm getting an error here. Cannot import statement outside a module, and it's because I didn't define as module here. So now it's all happy. So let's look at the console for a little bit. So I'm gonna clear this up. By the way, I'm using Vite to do this. So let's see what the schema does. So what an amazing thing I can do is let me log this. I can just say to the schema to value. If I save, you're gonna see when I do a to value from that schema, it already creates an object for me. So this solves the problem where in your interface or in your application, you constantly creating these objects to match the data or how you want to look like. And for here, all I have to call is grab a schema of the data and call it to value. It will automatically generate something for me. You see here, it used default values. So here I already put my ID. It creates a UUID for me. The name is empty. It's completed. It's set to false. And description is my default, no description. So here is a nice way to create uh, an object literal from the type definition that you created or the schema here. So that's nice too. It also has things like, I'm going to show you here, is valid field value. So is valid field value. So I can say is valid field value name 12. It's false because 12 is not a string as I defined here. But if I say here, John Doe, it's going to say it's true. So that's how it does validation for me. So I can also do get a schema in that invalid schema data fields. And I can say, and I can pass in the whole data, name 12, completed, Yes. And if I save this, it's going to say that name and completed are invalid. So get invalid schema data field. So if I can validate my data against the schema. So let's say I receive some data from API or receive some data from user, and I want to make sure that data is valid. So I can just compose it here and make sure, and it lets them do my validation for me. So here I can say John Doe here. Now it's just say the completed is invalid. So the completed must be a Boolean. So I can say true. So there you go. It comes back empty. So you see the schema is already validating my data for me, which is I often use in my application. All right. Just do something real quick here. Okay. So see my schema is validating things for me, which is I don't have to worry about. So now I haven't created my store yet. So let's create the store that handles everything. So here I'm going to export the const to do store and going to create a new client store. So here's client store and I'm going to give it a name. I'm also going to type it. Type is very good because especially if you're working with the store in your application, the type here is awesome. Is the best way I can describe it. So here I'm going to find a store. I'm going to say to-dos is my store, and I need to provide a schema. So the store how my data look like, and like that I just created a store. I just created a to-do store. Um, and it handles everything for me. Serializing, deserializing, validation, everything. I'm gonna show you. So what we can also configure this. So I can tell it what my app name is. Actually, before I do that, by default it uses IndexedDB. I don't know if you're familiar with using IndexedDB, but it's very complex. Also, if you use local storage, you cannot store complex data in the local storage. You have to stringify and put in the store first, but also not all the type of data can be stringified and put in the store. And what the store does, it allows you to do to pick whatever you want as a store option in the browser, permanent store option, and it handles everything for you. So the type, actually, I think is a schema here. Uh, I want to find the types. Default value. I'm gonna find the type definition of it handles a whole lot of not coming up, but it handles a whole lot of types. You can even store imagine storing a I don't know a blob in local storage. So here, because I created it, see here, it says client store to do successfully created. Just because I did that. So it already created my store successfully. By default, like I said, it uses IndexedDB. So I can come here in the application and I can see it created my app, a store here. So I can come back and see to do there has 0 items now, blank. So I'm just gonna delete this too. I'm gonna delete database. I'm gonna delete database. Local storage here. You also see I have something that I had before, so I'm gonna delete. So what I can tell it about my app name. So this is nice. So I can tell my app name why this is important. So it also handles versioning of your app for you. I'm gonna explain. Let me a couple things. So I can also deepen the screen, uh, manage to-dos item. I can also tell it the type. So let's do something. I'm gonna do type, and the type can be client store. I'm gonna do type, and it can be memory storage. It can like is in memories in type in JavaScript. Excuse me. You can also pick local storage. You can also pick IndexedDB, and you can also pick WebSQL. And whatever you pick, the interface is always the same. So this is the beauty of it. The interface is always the same. You don't have to worry about the complexity of the NextDB. You don't have to worry if one uh, uh, is supported in the browser or not. You only care about storing your data. You store your data and that's it. So I'm going to pick memory storage here for this example. So you can see here when I did it, it didn't create anything. Well, let me create WebSQL app. So when I refresh, you see my now if I go on the WebSQL, I see my to-do app. I see to-dos organized very well. So this is the to-do app here will organize it in things like this. So you have your storage for the to-dos, your to-do app. You can have under here maybe create a different storage for users. And the beauty of this is you can also you handle different data separately. I'm going to show you how that is important. So for example, if you create Redux, for example, you may have one massive, you have a single store and then you have all these things and a lot going on in that store. Um, you can also do that here, but what this allows you, you create individual store where you interact with directly, which is important. And what you can also do is nest them. So let's say I create a different, so I'm just, oh, I can also put local storage here. If I save, let me just show you that real quick. Nothing shows local storage. See now I don't have WebSQL. Nothing stored. Like sure, if I do IndexedDB, oh, seems like I have an error. Oh, because I have this thing here. So if I go back, application, I'm using Chrome by the way. So here I'm going to index the store. So you see the to do app, it has versions, object stores. So you see I can handle everything for me. So if you ever wonder, oh, I want to use IndexedDB. So by default, it checks if the browser supports IndexedDB and uses it. If not, it tries WebSQL. If not, it uses local storage. If not, it uses memory in memory. But you can also define that. You can also say, hey, if you tried IndexedDB and you didn't find it, just try uh, memory storage. I don't care. I only want IndexedDB or in memory. That's up to you. Uh, so I'm gonna stick with memory because the reason I want to stick to memory is because I want to show you some setup that it's even though it's not permanent, it feels like it is. You're not even gonna feel. You're gonna forget about the data and really focus on the UI, which is something you need to do when you're building web applications. So here, I'm gonna come here, delete this so we don't have confuse anything. Not that we're gonna get. But so let's say I want to nest the source. So let's pretend I have user schema. I'm also create an interface. This is just, I'm going to delete this by the way. Let's say we have user extend schema default value and the user has name, which is going to be string. That's it. And then we're going to create schema um, user. It's going to be user. Um, it's just going to be name. It's going to be required. And here on a to do, what I can do, I'm going to say user, and I can use the interface. For here, I'm going to just come here. I'm going to say user. I'm going to use a user schema. So this is how we handle uh, oh, new schema value, user schema. And we're going to say is required. So whenever this thing is required. So if I come here, I'm going to comment out store real quick. I'm going to do user schema, see what happens. So cool. Log here, user schema to value. Whenever I do this, look, it created my user for me whenever I do that. But let's say I want a user. I can also create a user, admin, yeah, user schema to value here. And I can spread, say user is admin. So creating a user, see my user here, and I'm gonna do name admin. Name is equal John Doe. If I create his, so you can see my user is John Doe. It has his ID, created date, last updated date, and I just created it. So when I do a store, the store will, so the schema will deeply validate nested schema. So you can nest schema to create complex data if you want. And the store is also aware of your nesty or your nested things. So you can create a store if you really want the idea of having a single store. You can just create a single store and just have all your things right there. So you can just use the Redux way, or you can just keep everything separated because you have you can just import separate things and deal with them separately. So I'm not going to keep the user. I'm not going to care about the user here. I'm going to do everything. Gone, gone, gone. We're going to have our store. And also, you can also do version. I can say version 1. This is my store version 1. And it uses the version 1. So let's say that later on, I change something about my store. Maybe I change the type. I can just use versions 2. So what that means is if somebody used your application and had a store in the browser with version 1, the next time they use your application and your store changed, maybe the data changed, maybe the schema changed, maybe the configuration of your store changed, you can just bump the version. And what the store going to do is going to say, oh, when the application renders on the browser, it's going to say, oh, this user already used. There's some data stored in the locally in this browser, but this user were using version 1. So what I'm going to do, I'm either going to try to update it or I'm going to create a new store with version 2. So, so the user gets the updated store. So if they had previously local storage data, that's not going to be used, that's going to be ignored, and then you're going to have the version 2. So that's very important because if you have users that use your let's say you use your application and they save the data in the local storage, for example, in one format, and then you come back next time you're going to read the same that old format is going to break your application. And with the versioning here allows you to check, hey, this is not the right version, so I'm not going to use the data in the format, so I'm just going to create everything new. I'm going to ignore the previous data store in this user browser. So versioning is very important here. So I'm going to do version 1 because I'm already done. So and you compare this to setup you do for NGRX with a Angular or the Redux that you do. This is by far the most minimalistic you can create a store, and it's more power and it gives you more control than any of those options. Um, and gonna blow your mind on a little more. So one thing you can do about stores, you can subscribe to them. It's a simple subscription. So subscribe, and then here it has an event type and data. So here I'm gonna log event type and data. This is probably not where. So here, the first event it gets is the ready event, and it's set to true. So see my store is ready. So you see we did log here. It logs by the store, and it says it's ready. So maybe I want to do something when it's ready, right? So for example, I want to fetch the API when the store is ready and then populate the store with the data that come from the API. So here I'm not even at the UI yet. I'm just managing my data before I build any UI, which we're going to do in a little bit. So let's say I want to, so if event type is equal client store, oh, so here I can pick anything. I can pick event type. So here is set up for me. If event type is ready, what I want to do, I'm going to make this asynchronous, by the way. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to await. And the to-do store has a very simple method called load items. Load items does is it takes an object, whatever, a list of objects, and what it does, it try to put it in the store, but it will first validate everything before it puts in the store. Where we have that as data, so we're gonna await on a to-do service. I haven't tested this, so let's say this works. Oh, by the way, I know it's not gonna work because I never ran the server. So here I'm gonna come here and I'm gonna do node server. So you see it's already broken. So there you go. Find Express. Oh, I never install. Install Express. So here, let's look at what else the server requires. By the way, I'm using WebStorm here. Server core is probably going to complain about cores. So I'm going to come back here and npm install cores. And there you go. Let's see if you're going to complain anything. So cores go away. Perfect. So now let's go back and run my server. Okay, server running on 4500. And we have, oh, I kill. So now we're gonna npm run dev, which is gonna run vite. Oh, npm run local maybe. What did I do? Yeah, yeah, local. Oh, it's complaining about something. Oh, let me just comment out here. So come back here, run this baby. The request could not be resolved. Oh, I think Vite has a bug or a limitation where you cannot do something like this. Client store. I think that's what it is. I'm gonna comment out real quick to make sure we're good. Terminate. Oh, I see. I already had it running. I have too many things here. Anyway, so let's go again. npm run local to run my front end. Why is it complaining about user since title index in the middle? This gotta happen when you live, huh? Finally, patterns are imported but could not be resolved. Okay, now it works. And then we're gonna do node. Damn, that was because of a dot. Come on, Vite. You can do better than that. So now we have a server running and we have a local app running. So we see the ready there. So let's go and handle. So I like to use distraction free mode. So we can see here, we can move everything, focus on the code. So here we're gonna wait search and we're gonna get items, get to dos. Yeah, get to dos. And we have the import. I'm gonna remove that. I'm gonna import and save it. And it's probably gonna come back empty. So that's empty. So let me just first see that. It's gonna come back empty actually. Here, I'm gonna use the network tab. Network. Come on, network. Okay, network. And I refresh, we see the to-dos call here, we get, when I preview, the data came back empty. So what are we doing? We are waiting for store to be ready, and then we're fetching all the data and putting in the store. Maybe here you have an API, you probably want to get the first 25 pages, 25 items in API, whatever the setup you have here, that's up to you. So this library doesn't have any opinion on how you handle your data. It's up to you. So all I choose to do is handle the data there. So another thing about store, you can intercept your store actions before they happen. Let's say I wanna create a to-do item. If I put that item in the store, save it locally, and then call the API to save it, what can happen is that API may throw an error. So what that means, if we throw an error, I have to go back to the store, clean it up because I created something that should not be there, and then will work saved permanently in the app in the client storage. We don't want that. So what we want to do is we gonna we want to create an item, we call the API, and if it's successful, then we save it in our store locally. Otherwise, we handle the error. Amazingly, this thing does everything for you. So let me see, go to the store, and then what I can do is then I can subscribe to before change. You can only subscribe to before change once per store. So here, so subscribe here, you can subscribe many times anywhere, but a event type, before changes can only be in once. So event type, and also it gets the data. So the data that the action receives. So here I can do, let's do a switch. So I'm going to do a switch, and then I'm going to do a switch on event type, and I'm going to create a case for client store event type created. So we're going to detect when a to-do item is being created. And what I can do, I'm going to await and then do a to-do service. So we create to do and pass that data. So the data is what we're trying to save into the store. And here I'm going to break. So the before change, you can return something. So if you return true, that means, hey, go ahead and save it in the store. And if this throws an error, the store will handle an error and will broadcast an error event, which I can catch here in the subscribe. So if I want to subscribe to handle all the error, I can subscribe here. So the event type will be error. So you can see here, it has the red event, created event, loaded. When you load all the items, there's error, aborted. You can tell it's if an item is aborted. The aborted happens if you return false, deleted, updated, cleared, etc. So maybe what I can do is that, hey, I check the data here, check the data, um, validate the data. If I want to do some specific validation, I want to add something specific in the data, and then push the API. And if that's necessarily going to return false, maybe I want to handle my error here directly and not let it broadcast. Or maybe I just, if any case, I want to abort, all I have to do is return false. If I throw an error, it will be catch, it will create an error event. If I just handle and return true, then it's just gonna go ahead. So one thing I want to also do, I'm going to handle when somebody tried to delete a to do. So delete to do. So here to do can be anything. I'm going to do any. So just don't worry about. And we're going to default. Well, I'm not going to handle any default. So I'm only care if something great created and deleted. So what I did here, I set up my store. I hooked it up. I set it up with the new items, and I also hooked it up with my service API. So far, my store is ready to go. So let's handle it in the UI. For that, I'm going to create to-dos app. So see, we spend a lot of time setting up our data infrastructure. So do my app, I'm going to install something. I'm going to install Coco, which is super simple to. Coco allows me to create vanilla web components. And now we're too much about explaining it. We're gonna focus on anything we just so you don't have to learn any JavaScript syntax. It's very simple. Just write JavaScript. It's not there. So all right. So let's do this. So abstraction free. So I'm gonna import Cuckoo, and I want a web component. And here I'm gonna create a class, a component app, a to-dos app. Oh, extend. Actually, I'm gonna do context provider. because I want to do my component app inside the page. So it's server side render, like that. So I have my to-dos app, and now I have to tell the browser, hey, this is an app. So now I can come back here. Instead of doing this, importing the store, I'm going to import the app. Actually, it's not there. So I'm going to do app, to-dos app. Beautiful. And here, because I just created a to-dos app, I can just do um, to-dos app. Oh, nice. I'm going to put that there. So that's it. I just created an app. Let's see. What I want to do is I'm gonna put the to-dos here. So I'm gonna scream and say, hey, to-dos, hey, what's up with to-dos here? I don't have the to-dos because I didn't never define it. So let's create the to-dos. So all I'm gonna do is say to-dos, which is gonna be to-do array. It's gonna be empty. If I run that, you see it's empty. So we have empty to-do there, empty list. Now on mount, what I want to do is I want to subscribe to my store. I want to grab my data. So here on mount, here I'm going to return to do store subscribe. And here I'm going to listen to event type. It's also going to get details of the event. And so what I'm doing here is I'm on mount when the components loads on the page. I'm subscribing to the store. I'm returning that subscription. The subscribe returns an unsubscribe button, an unsubscribe function, which I can call to unsubscribe from the store. And the Cocoa amount takes a return. So if you return something, that means it's gonna be clear. It's gonna be if it returns a function, it means that function needs to be called when it destroyed, when the components go away. So this will clean up things for me anyway. So here, what I want to do, first thing, I'm gonna check if so here event type equals client store event type error. So I want to show the main error. So I'm gonna say error, generic error, generic error. If there is an error, all I'm gonna do, I'm gonna do this generic error is equal details error message generic error. And here I'm gonna go back to my HTML. I'm gonna display a banner. So I'm gonna do banner error error banner. And here I'm gonna do a generic error. Beautiful generic error. I can also do bind generic error. Perfect. And we can check the element here. We're gonna see inside to do we have generic error, which is empty, and I'm also gonna only show it if there is a generic error. See here, I'm gonna go to do's app. See, there's nothing there because there's no generic error. So let's mimic an error happen. So let's say once I load items here, something happened. I'm gonna throw new error. Failed to load to-dos. Maybe not here. Here. Oh, what I can come back here. Let's see event type. So that will happen. This is not throwing anything. It should have been caught. It's not the right place. Oh, because this was never called. So this only gets called when uh, something in the store gets done. So I can do here. I can do to do uh, set timeout. Just I really want to show it. So this happens. So to do store, create item. Actually, we can just do this. I don't have to do this. So if I just create item, we can see that this is uncaught failed error. So you say name do not match not match schema. Here, just throwing an error. So now I can just throw an error. Uh, so you see here, when I throw an error, I caught the error and it shows failed to load out to do's. So let me give it some style sheet here. Get turn. I'm gonna create a style. I'm gonna do host. And here we call it error banner. Error banner. Background. Red. It's complaining properly. Style sheets. Oh, still complaining about this. Oh, of course, I forgot to put this. Gotta be style sheet. What am I doing wrong here? Style sheet. Oh, it's a string. And I'm gonna make this. I could just use the CSS to do this outside. Save me the trouble. Oh, I forgot to add this. So now we get in there. So we have the banner. Perfect. So we have the banner there for the and from family sans serif. Okay. So we have the banner. Perfect. And we're throwing an error here and we're catching. So if anything happens, that will catch and it will set the banner here because that's where we're setting the message. I want to not throw this. So the banner will come up whenever there's errors in our application. So you see, it's saying throw an error here. I'm gonna remove that. Cannot convert identifier to null. Let me just undo anything here. Oh, This is over here. Why is it complaining? Converting. Oh, so now here, because what's going on here? What is trying to convert? That's no. Oh, I see. So let's continue to handle this. I see what's going on. So if now we're gonna handle something very similar. We're gonna handle if the event is aborted. I don't know what to do. It's aborted, so I'm gonna leave it blank. Else, let's log here. And we're gonna say this. I'm gonna wait. Let's make this asynchronous. I'm gonna await for to-do store. I'm gonna get items. It's gonna be empty. So here we're gonna log the details. So you see we have two things happening there. Seems like we have two events. Oh, wow. So all this time that when I finally fix this error, I start getting this. So let me go back and clear my server. Oh, oh. And clear my server here. So it's nothing on the back end. So we come back clean again. Reset. So now it's come back empty. Now we don't have that problem. So we see the to-dos come list empty. So let's handle this correctly. What I'm probably gonna do, here, if something gets aborted, I'm gonna do action aborted. Maybe, I don't know, could not, because I know the event type. Oh, could not, cannot complete the action. So something got aborted, not complete the action. That's it. I believe the details here, I have to look at the documentation, but it tells you what the action was. I think it details action. I think that's it. Let me just dig. So here I'm just loading there. But actually what I should have been doing here is just say list to-dos is equal. So otherwise we're just gonna populate the thing there. So let's create the to-do. So to create a to-do, I need a button. So I'm gonna come here instead of doing this. Actually, I'm gonna do it here. I'm gonna call it control actions. Oh, no, ID. Control actions, and here I'm gonna put a button, type button, and I'm gonna have it create to do. So we have a create to do button there. And now what I need to do is handle the to do, the create to do. So here In the to-dos app, I'm gonna handle the create to do. So I'm gonna do an async method here, create to do. And I'm just gonna log for now. Create to do here. If I go to HTML, when this gets clicked, I'm gonna call create to do. I'm gonna call here. That's it. So now if you look, if I click here, we're gonna see create to do. Let's handle this. So I'm gonna make it very simple. So I'm gonna use window prompt because I'm not gonna create like a modal. So I'm gonna use prompt. Now I don't have to wait. So enter to do name. This is gonna be this. So here, create to do. I'm gonna log the name. So I'm gonna do. Let's refresh here. Clear this again. I'm gonna create to do. We got the prompt. Say buy shoes. Okay, and we have create to do and buy shoes here. This is what we're gonna do. So now here, I need to check if the name is empty. So name trim, if his name's not empty. So one cool thing is I don't have to, when I create an item, all I have to do, because the to-do store already knows the format, already knows the schema. All I have to do is worry about what's the important thing that this thing is waiting. So if I come back here in the schema, I can say that the name is required. The name is required. Whenever I'm creating an item, the name is required. And if I don't provide anything else, it uses the default. So the default for completed will be false. The default for description will be no description. So here, all I have to do is provide the default value. Maybe I can provide it more. Doesn't matter. Also, if I just do this without checking, this is just checking is bonus, it's actually gonna check for me. I think so. So if I just do this, if I just come here and do empty, it's gonna throw error. See, it's gonna throw error. Say may do not match the schema. It doesn't actually tell me why, but I can look at the schema and I know for sure that because the name here was empty, and the name as we look is required true. So I cannot create a to do item without the name. So this is throwing the error. And yeah, so the validation error is handled there. Um, by the way, if it creates an item, it will just return that item for me. If it doesn't create, it will return null. So in this case, it probably return null. So that's why I'm checking here. I'm gonna create that because I want to handle this. I'm gonna say this generic error name cannot be empty. So you see, they already handles the error for me. So now if I try to do the same thing, I say name cannot be empty. So we got that. So let's create a new item. So if I come here, so buy shoes, create an item. You see there you got, it populates there. So that's the item. So we have the ID. I can make this. So we have the ID, last updated date, name by shoes, description, no description, completed false. But let's actually render this. So if I refresh this now, we're getting a problem. Say cannot convert undefined or null. So what's happening is it's trying to load an item data. So the data coming back here. So we can check the network. We're gonna see what I did wrong here. Probably did something wrong somewhere. So to do's, see preview return data completed. So that's what the API is returning there. Cannot convert undefined or null to object. So where did I do wrong? go to the store. Instead, I'm just gonna log this. See what come back. Did I screw up here? Oh, it's an array. Yeah, that's correct. So it seems like load items is not happy with that. Just complaining here. So why? Ooh, this is a sensitive one. I don't know why it's doing that. So let's do a quick debug. Items must be an array. Promise. Could be a thing. What if I try to do items for each to do store update item? That works. So we see that renders there. Okay, so let's do that instead. Mm, this complaining. Oh, yeah. Promise all. Oh, no. Seems like the load item is not working well. So we're gonna do a wait. Oof. It's a lot of items, so that's oh, there's a lot to do. Okay. Oh, because I kept creating it. Oh, I see what's going on. So when I created it, then it came back, it created it again. And it keeps adding, so it was in a loop. So this is what's going on. I don't know what this. So it's not happy about this. Load items. Sucks. Uh, okay, so what I'm gonna do, instead of doing this here, do this here. And what I'm gonna do again is go back to the server and clear it up. So you see the events coming there. So it should be empty now. All right. here, let's create one new item. Buy shoes. There you go. Awesome. So now let's render this. Instead of doing this, I'm gonna do a to-do item. But you get the idea here. So we already handle all the data complications. So here I can just say repeat to-dos. Gonna do a title here. To-do name. Oh, I never defined to-do here. So buy shoes. And P is gonna be the description. Save, no description. And also I'm gonna do actions. I'm also gonna do a button. And I'm gonna delete. And that's also gonna be a type button. And we're gonna delete to do. And we're gonna pass the to do ID. So what I want to do here is we're just repeating this div of class to do item for all the items in the list. And we using the to do here that we described that each item is going to be referenced by. I'm going to do name, to the description, and we have to do, and we're going to use the to do ID to call this. So now I'm going to create a to do, delete to do here, similar way. So here, I'm going to create a function, the method for this thing, delete to do. And as we define in the template, we're going to do ID, it's going to be string. And the first time I'm going to check, I'm actually going to use the confirm. So actually, I'm going to first to the ID, render this. So here we render this. So if I click delete, we're going to see that it puts the ID. So first I'm going to do, I'm going to find it's not going to be possible because I never put these things in the store. Delete this. So I'm going to find the to do, await, oh, it is never sync. Going to await to do store, get item, to do ID. And we're going to get the ID to do instead. Get back null because I'm not actually putting things in store. I'm just putting this there. So I'm gonna use, actually I don't need, why I'm doing this. So all I'm doing, all I need to do is confirm. Confirm, are you sure you, oh, why am I can just pass the to do instead. Why I'm bugging this, I don't need to find this. I already have it. So let's log the to do instead. So if I click to delete, so there you go. It handles everything here. So I'm gonna say, are you sure you want to delete being thing? I'm gonna do to do name. Are sure you want to delete this item? Actually, I want to put it inside the if statement. And if it's so, I'm gonna await to do store, remove item, to do ID. It's probably not gonna work because I didn't have to put in the store. So yeah, the problem is the load item did not work. So that's the problem. So, but this is the idea. So let me see if I can fix it up real quick. Oh, so by the way, look, oh, not a wrong place. So here, when I create my item, I only pass the name. It create my full item for me. Validation done, everything done. And also it calls the API on the side, on the back for me. And it updates the store for me. So if I go, let me just show you here. Go to the gym. You can see here it made a request, made a post request, and it passed the data. So you go to the gym, no description, it put up everything for me, and then everything renders for me. So I don't have to worry about uh, all the API communication for me. And if I want to delete, I can just click and delete, and it will remove. So removing ID here, we'll just first call the API, and if it's successful, it happens, then you're gonna go ahead and remove that from the store. So one thing I want to take a look before is trying to figure out. Let's see if I can do a quick thing here so it actually works. No, you have to work with this. So this had to work. I don't know why it's not working, but that's the problem. I have to take a look later. Yeah, because that's where it's throwing error. That was going wrong there. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. Let me check the docs. I was not able to find it on the docs. Client storage. Oh, client web storage. Maybe was that the wrong thing? Client web storage. What's the GitHub? Mm-hmm. Seems to be okay. Hmm. Okay, now it works. Oof. Something when it comes back from APIs was not working. Oh, it's the ID. That and the ID. Something related to the ID. Okay, so now oh, because the ID is not the same. Makes sense. All right, that works now. Perfect. So we don't have to fetch the service. So the whole idea is you don't have to work with anything for the backend, for the handles uh, to handle the service, the API communication directly. So you just interact with your store and you do your stuff. And look how simple it is to create an item. You don't have to specify the whole object you want to create. You just specify the things that you need or the things that you have, the information, and let the store fill up the rest if that's what you want. You put there if you need to specify specific, or you can be specific, or you can let the store handle everything for you. So handle validation, everything for you. And you just remove items. So this interface is for everything, for every type of item you have. You can subscribe to your specific one. You can handle many at once. It's totally up to you. How do you handle your store? But this idea, make sure you separate the UI from the API communication and data handling, and just focus on the data, on the UI when you need to work on the UI, and then just focus on the data separately away from the UI. So that's the whole point of this. I guess this is it. Um, Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one.